I would now like to introduce your speakers for today. Eva Velasquez is the President and CEO of the Identity Theft Resource Center. She previously served as the Vice President of Operations for the San Diego Better Business Bureau and spent 21 years at the San Diego District Attorney's Office. She is recognized as a nationwide expert and has been featured on such outlets as the CNBC Nightly Business Report, Huffington Post Live, Forbes, Bloomberg, Kiplinger's, and numerous other outlets. David Seifert has spent the majority of his career in the HR tech space with an emphasis in employee businesses. He spent a number of years in the ACA compliance division of Equifax in both business development and product management before working with a leading provider in the student loan benefits space. Now with Aura Identity Guard, David works with the employers and brokers to provide insight on the value of providing a cyber wellness benefit for employees. And with that, you now have the floor, Eva.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. For those of you who aren't familiar with the ITRC, we are a 501c3 charity organization whose mission is to empower and guide all stakeholders. That includes victims, consumers, businesses, and government to minimize their risk and mitigate the impact of identity crimes and compromise. And we do that through a variety of services. Victims and consumers can receive recovery assistance and risk minimization assistance through a number of channels, and that includes our toll-free number, live chat, our web-based help center, our free ID theft help app, text-to-chat, email, social media direct messages. Now, we haven't started receiving contacts through carrier pigeon, but I'm working on it. So whatever way people want to get in touch with us and engage with us, we are happy to talk to them. And we also provide detection and prevention education, and we're actively involved in building a greater understanding of identity-based issues through partner activities, just like this webinar. David.
Great. Thanks, Eva, and thanks to everybody on the line for joining today. So we're talking here about reimagining, redefining employee total well-being, especially in this new work-from-home era. So quickly kind of revisiting the evolution, where we come from, where we are today, where we're going. So initially, it's always been about employee wellness and one-off programs that help support employees. Well, that conversation has shifted and really looking at the total well-being of employees and a variety of programs that help support, all with, of course, the goal to be able to attract and retain a productive workforce. Well, of course, as you all know, physical wellness and mental wellness programs have been around for decades. So starting with fitness centers and tobacco cessation programs, EAP, well, physical and mental wellness programs evolve as well. Every year we have new programs. Nowadays, fitness trackers, teletherapy, stress management, so on and so forth. So the idea is that even within these initial two core pillars, the programs evolve with the times and with the need for employees. Now, the newest entrant, if you will, financial wellness, really has hit the map in the past number of years and has become very, very commonplace in terms of providing these types of programs. What's interesting is to think about years ago, employers probably would have never considered, let's provide a program that focuses on our employees' finances. That's just a line we don't want to cross. Well, nowadays that is commonplace. And of course, as everybody knows, all of these programs are intertwined. So if I'm stressed financially, well, that's probably going to impact me mentally/emotionally, which then can lead to physical impact. And I know everyone on this line is very familiar with all of this and not news to you. The reason we talk through this is the idea of evolution and where we're going from here. And it's Aura's perspective that a new pillar deserves recognition and is really necessary for employee total well-being. And that is cyber wellness. So when we think about how much activity we conduct online, and this is meaningful activity, so we are managing our finances online, we are socializing online, kids are living their lives online, we shop online, we even manage our home security systems online. So all of this activity combined very much can and does have an impact on financial wellness, leading to mental wellness, leading to physical wellness. So this concept of a new pillar given the times that we are in and really a new category of cyber wellness. Now, if we take a look at, well, the latest entrant, if you will, financial wellness, what led to this being a very prevalent kind of category within employee total well-being? Well, first looking at underlying factors. So this list certainly can be much longer than it is here, but we've got $1.7 trillion in outstanding student debts. Healthcare costs, generally speaking, continue to increase over time. Populations within the baby boomer generation segments are not prepared for retirement. So there's different reasons, of course, within different generations why financial wellness programs are needed. And then we look at the actual employee demand for this. Well, millennials, who represent the largest segment of the workforce, they're spending more time at work worrying about personal finances than any other generation. And 59% of employees are more stressed about financials than any other issue. So the employers responded to this. By 2020, 62% of employers feel extreme responsibility for employees' financial health, and roughly 50% of employers are providing financial wellness programs. Well, if we then take a look at cyber wellness, which again we feel is on deck, if you will, for the next category, do we see any similarities of drivers? Well, there are certainly the underlying factors. Cybercrimes are on the rise. Eva and I will speak in detail about this, of course. Unfortunately, they're on the rise. We are more connected digitally than ever, and this will only continue. And we do have this new work from home reality. People will start going back to the office, of course, but generally speaking, we're going to have a much larger work from home workforce than we ever have. So underlying factors. Well, what are the drivers? Well, through polls conducted by Gallup and other institutions around what are the crimes that concern you the most as an individual, number one on the list is fear that hackers will access my personal or financial information. Number two on the list is identity theft. And this, is on top of having your home broken into, having your car broken into. So there's this kind of constant underlying anxiety, although it doesn't drive human behavior every day, but it's always on people's minds. And the fact that we do spend 7 hours a day online just leads for more opportunity, and therefore we need more protection. So the drivers are certainly there. In the employer response, really employers have started to take that first step. So roughly 40% of employers do offer a traditional identity theft protection program, which is great, and it's a very good first step. But identity theft protection alone isn't enough because ID theft is typically reactive in nature. Really, a cyber wellness program needs to be proactive. It needs to stop attempts of cyber crimes before they can occur, protecting devices, protecting networks, removing data online where it should not be. So we draw these comparisons that it's natural that these pillars are evolving. And cyber wellness, because our lives are so digital, it's the natural next focus. And when we look at, determining what benefit programs are most meaningful and, always deciding the holy grail of any benefit is, well, what's the ROI? Which is certainly not always easy to quantify, but why is a benefit meaningful to employees and why is it meaningful to us, the employer? Well, when we look at some trending voluntary benefits, there's a lot that have become quite popular. So pet insurance, student loan repayment, prepaid legal services, all great programs. They don't necessarily have value for every person in an employee population. So with identity theft crimes occurring every 2 minutes, and the reality is we all are at risk, if you will, and need protection. So this is a benefit program, a broader cyber wellness benefit program that will be valuable to the masses of employees. And also we'll talk more about how, a cyber wellness program is really going to inherently help the company be more protected. The more individuals and employees are engaged in their personal cyber wellness, the more they're going to be at least aware and engaged in company security. So when we look at remote work and the fact that cybercrimes are certainly on the rise since the pandemic era, an increase in over 400%. Now, partially this is due to our lives are just becoming more digital, but also in part employees are at home and maybe don't have the infrastructure to stay safe, whether it's work devices, personal devices, so on and so forth. We've seen a massive increase in malware attacks on mobile devices. Again, the more we live on these mobile devices, unfortunately, the more cyber criminals will flock to those. And then just from the employee's perspective, that almost half of employees are concerned about their cybersecurity risks that they're opening themselves up to at home. Now, if we look at some trends that are emerging, especially in this era, of course, government assistant related programs, and I'm sure everyone on the line has seen all of this in the news. Myself and Eva will speak in more detail about unemployment claims, but also fraudulent activity around PPP loans, around stimulus checks, phishing scams. So phishing scams have been around for forever and will continue, but now more targeted because COVID-19 is top of mind for individuals. If there's a robocall, something to click here, phishing email that may get somebody's attention, it's hard not to go after that. Verification of PII. So I'm sure everyone on the line at some point has received some type of robocall, maybe claiming to be the Social Security Administration, asking for you to call a number back. The idea that sometimes individuals will kind of fall to that and be a little more trusting than they should be. And then finally, targeting the elderly. Unfortunately, elderly have typically a lot to protect and may be a little more susceptible when it comes to cybercrime. So a number of trends that are emerging that employees certainly should be diligent about. Now, unemployment claims fraud. So this, again, is very prevalent in the news. I'm certain that everyone is familiar with this. The fact that it has increased nearly 600% since before the pandemic. And from an employee-employer perspective, why is this so important? Well, employees are being informed about this in a number of ways. So they're either being contacted by the state unemployment agency, or they're starting to receive the IRS form 1099-G, or even the employer informs them. And if this is a fraudulent claim, employees are confused and don't know what to do with that. They may not realize the impact that unemployment benefits to some degree is taxable income. So certainly a benefit that you never actually benefit from, want to make sure to resolve that. So this is really critical in terms of awareness and what the process is to resolve this. And companies like us here at Aura, we support employees in that manner. Otherwise, it's engaging with the bureaus, engaging with the unemployment, with the state agencies. So education around this for employees is certainly key. I'm sure folks on the line have started to get questions from employees. So with that, I'll pass it to you, Eva.
Thanks, David. And before I jump into the data from the Federal Trade Commission, I just want to comment on this more holistic movement to cyber wellness. It's something that the ITRC is very happy to see, and it's occurring throughout the ecosystem. So this is also something that our lawmakers and our regulators are looking at, and I'm going to dive into that later in the presentation, but I just want to throw my support behind this more holistic mindset and not treating this like it exists in a silo. I mean, the thieves, the bad actors don't operate in silos. Why should we? And now with that, we'll dig into some of the data from the Federal Trade Commission from their Consumer Sentinel database, just to level set for everybody. In 2020, we had 916,000 identity theft reports that were received by the FTC. And when we compare that to 2019, it was 650,000. And please realize that's a floor. It's not the ceiling. These are very good nationally representative numbers, but they don't capture every incident because not all victims report to the FTC. I won't get into too deep into the weeds, but we do have a fractured reporting system, so it's very hard to capture the full scope of this problem, but these are very good indicators. And there have been a lot of theories as to why fraud, and you can see that overall fraud also increased in 2020. But why so drastically? And really there isn't a single reason. It was more of a perfect storm. David already touched on it, but when you add together the dramatic shift in online engagement, the huge amount of dollars that were put into these relief programs, the antiquated cyber infrastructure and authentication processes that we used, all of those, in addition to this one more piece of the puzzle that I'm not actually hearing discussed as broadly, and that's the prevalence of the data that was compromised in previous data breaches leading up to the pandemic, and how that has helped to fuel this increase in identity theft. According to our data breach report, the number of breaches actually dropped in 2020 versus 2019. Why? Why did that happen? Well, there were so many opportunities to monetize the data that was already available. These opportunities presented themselves. Many of them were pandemic related. So the threat actors spent their time monetizing what they already had rather than trying to obtain new identity credentials and new data. They've shifted their tactics. And I think that is an important piece of this puzzle for employers and employees to understand. We need to know where the threats are coming from. And I will, again, dig in a little bit more on more of the data further in the presentation. Next slide, please. And the ITRC's experience was similar to the FTC's in what we saw. We saw dramatic increases in pandemic-related fraud. And keep in mind that we've talked about these new risks, but these are all in addition to the risks that we were all previously dealing with. So we're just sort of piling on here. And the problem at the state level with unemployment ID theft, just to give you context, it became more prevalent. It's not a new issue. The use of someone else's credentials to obtain government benefits or services like unemployment benefits, it's been around for a long time. It simply became more lucrative during the pandemic. So for context, in 2019, we, the ITRC, out of the approximately 10,000 requests for direct assistance that we get through our contact center, 19 of those were for unemployment identity theft, specifically for that type of identity crime. In 2020, we had 11,000 requests for direct assistance, and more than 900 were regarding unemployment identity theft. And it has not stopped. It keeps going. We're well over 1,000 since the pandemic started. Last month, we had an additional 145 contacts, again, just for this one type. And no state was immune. This occurred across all 50 states. And you heard David talk about the overall costs, and you saw on his slide, that estimated $36 billion is based on reports from the Inspector General for the U.S. Department of Labor. In mid-2020, they told Congress that the fraud could reach $26 billion, and that was before the state of California warned that it had already exceeded $11 billion just on that state. And while, look, we have to acknowledge that the biggest impact here was on individuals, but employers were affected as well. As David said, one of the ways that people found out they were impacted was often through their employer. The employer would receive that notification and realize that the person was still on their payroll. And then they had to contact the employee and figure out what was going on. Or sometimes an HR department would receive notifications, filings for employees that they didn't even have, that they never had. And then it was solely up to the business to devote that time and the resources into reporting and remediating that with the state. And this was not just at the state level. So you can see the bottom chart here is for stimulus fraud. And so that was at the federal level. And this is a new type of fraud that did not previously exist. And those are the public contacts that we received, we the ITRC, regarding just the stimulus payments. You can see that big spike in May. And it didn't stop completely, it just tapered off. But this is ongoing. When 2020 came to a close, we were down to 22 contacts, but in January with the new round of stimulus funding, we've seen another spike, and it's currently ongoing. Next slide, please. Oh, yep. And this is David's slide. Take it away, David.
All right, thank you, Eva. And so when we think about this new reality of work from home and how this fits into employee total well-being, it's pretty astonishing. Of course, everybody has been work from home for quite some time. More and more folks are going back to the office, but it's a slow go. 94% of employers allowing more work from home flexibility since the beginning of the pandemic. And thinking about compared to pre-pandemic, 83% of employees communicated they had little or no flexibility for working from home. So this is a massive shift. And there's obviously a lot of burden on employers to, from an internal security standpoint, policies and procedures, and making sure that the distributed workforce is safe and keeping the company safe while they're working at home. But it really opens this broader point that we're living in a reality where our work and personal life, that line is blurred, very blurred, and probably will be for quite some time, and maybe semi-permanently to some degree. And the reason this is important in thinking about, employee total well-being and the company, over 50%, this was a report that conducted by IBM, had some great information that over half of employees admit to using their personal devices for work operations. So that work-personal line, again, is blurring. There's now kind of an opening, if you will, for a remote workforce to company security more than there has been in the past. So when we think back to, okay, what type of benefit program is meaningful to both the employee and the employer? Well, the more that employees are engaged in their personal cyber well-being, the more engaged they're going to be, at minimum, with company security. So we always speak to the fact that employees can be your best frontline defenders. And so a benefit program that A, is benefiting them to provide that full protection, but also inherently helps them be really those stewards of security within the company is very important. And what can we expect in 2021? So with work from home, again, we will see a continued increase in number of attacks on home networks and home computers. The more we live on mobile devices, unfortunately, cyber criminals are going to flock to where we are. So going to continue to see that as well as ransomware attacks. So ransomware has certainly gotten some headlines recently in terms of incidents that have occurred, but even at the personal level. So individuals can be targeted if, let's say, for instance, a cyber criminal knows somebody's in kind of financial dire straits and maybe they have access to PII. So very targeted approaches. So obviously this all comes back to educating the employee population and training as well, but also going back to practicing personal cyber wellness.
And here's some of the data that supports, why do we think these are the trends and where are these things going? These are some of the key findings from the ITRC's most recent data breach report that I referenced earlier. We've been tracking publicly reported breaches in the U.S. since 2005, and we issue that annual report along with our key findings every year. And in 2020, we noticed some interesting trends that really highlight the need for us to shift our thinking for employees, employers, and just the general public to keep these good cyber practices, this, practice good cyber hygiene top of mind, and the need for training. To David's point, your team really is your first line of defense. And I think that people often mistakenly think of cybersecurity or even cyber wellness, anything related to cyber, as the IT department or the IT person's job. And they just don't recognize the role that individuals have in protecting both themselves but also their organization. So realistically, on this list of root causes of compromises, the only one that employees have little control over is that failure to configure cloud security. The rest of these, as individuals, they can have a huge impact. With physical attacks, things like device and document theft, an example is if an employee had a work laptop in their car and that their car is broken into, maybe it's stolen, how that laptop is protected and configured, is it encrypted? Are there good, strong passwords? Those things can be addressed by company training and policies and can make a big difference in whether that data is now accessible to whoever stole that laptop. And with the human and system errors, don't confuse this with phishing. I'll get into that in a minute. But an example here would be where an employee is legitimately sending an email with potentially sensitive data to someone else, and maybe it's someone inside the organization, but they accidentally send it to the wrong email recipient. And now that data is out in the wild. It's been sent to someone either inside or outside of the organization who wasn't supposed to have access to it. So it is truly simple human error. And now the cyber attacks with the phishing and business email compromise at the top of the list. I think we all know what phishing is. I'm assuming everybody knows what phishing is, where an employee receives an email with maybe a link or an embedded file, they click on it, and then it infects the entire system. And business email compromise, a specific type of phishing, as David said, it's where an employee receives an email that appears to be legitimate from a senior executive in the company with a request, maybe either for data, information, a payment for something of value to the company. But it turns out it's not a legitimate request. It's actually from someone outside the organization. Next slide, please. So let's unpack the phishing and business email compromise issue, because we've talked about remote work being here to stay. And what does that mean for employees and employers? How much of a rise in the phishing and ransomware can be attributed to working from home? Right now, there's a lot of groups trying to quantify that. But what we do know is that it has expanded that threat landscape, since now most people are going to have to protect two environments. Almost every employee is now going to have multiple devices, perhaps a personal device and a work device that is required for them to do their job. And as research has demonstrated, they are blending those together. They're not keeping them separate. So are there more phishing attacks aimed at remote workers? Yes, because there are more remote workers. Are they more effective? That is continuing to play out right now. But if we look at the numbers from last year of successful phishing and business email compromises, we see that it's the number one threat vector. And if there is good news here, it's that all of this, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but all of this can be addressed with employee training and resources for them to understand how they can protect themselves, how they can protect their organization. And I just want to emphasize that consumer behavior is the driving force behind these events. And as consumer behavior and employee behavior, it can be changed. We can address that. Clear policies about what legitimate requests for management look like, how they should be handled, where they should go when they have questions. That dedication to building a culture of cybersecurity includes good cyber hygiene and cyber wellness practices. And if we want to see these numbers decrease, it really is a critical first step. Next slide, I think is David's. Oh no, it's mine.
Still you.
And it's still me. Now this one is a little bit of a tangent, but I'm keeping it in here because I think it's interesting and it's not necessarily common knowledge, because it's not just financial data or your what you think of as your standard identity credentials that's valuable. So if any employee or business owner thinks, I don't have anything, or my employees don't have anything of value that the thieves would be after, really? Do they have a Gmail account? Do they have social media accounts? I mean, look at how much more valuable those accounts are than just a cloned MasterCard or a cloned American Express card. And because we know that people are crossing over, they are using their personal devices to work. They probably have those personal accounts are on those devices. It really does open up an entirely new set of vulnerabilities for people. It's not just about identity credentials. It's about the valuable data and how identity has expanded. Next slide, please. And I know I've talked a lot about data, and I really want to take a moment just to humanize some of this, because I think it's really easy for us to forget when we're analyzing all of these numbers, behind all of them, there's an actual person, a person that is represented and whose life is being adversely impacted. I believe personally that building a better shared understanding of these impacts is a critical role for the ITRC, and it's a huge part of our mission. And one of the ways that we accomplish this goal is through our aftermath study. We survey all of the victims that we helped in a previous year, and we ask them about their experience, not just how much time did you spend and how much money did you lose. We ask that, but we go much deeper. What were the emotional, the physical, the behavioral consequences? How was your life impacted? What were the lost opportunity costs? And when I say lost opportunity costs, just consider either the job applicant who doesn't pass a background check due to fraud, or the college-bound student who's unable to obtain necessary loans because a thief destroyed their credit, unbeknownst to them. And they have to delay pursuing higher education or pursuing that employment opportunity or even pursuing a promotion until they remediate those cases. And this is just some of the trend data from our most recent survey. We're seeing increases in feelings of frustration, feelings of powerlessness and helplessness, feeling violated. But the two things that I really want to highlight here are the re-victimization rates and the suicidal feelings. 28% of our respondents indicated that they were a previous victim of an identity crime versus 21% in the previous aftermath study. So 21% previously, 28% last year. And the increase in suicidal feelings, it hit double digits for the first time since we've been doing this study. And we generally have a small number of respondents, 3%, 6%, who report feeling suicidal, which is absolutely tragic. But this year it was 10%. Let that sink in. 10% of victims felt so overwhelmed and despondent that they considered ending their life as an option. Now, we'll be releasing this full study in May, and I encourage everyone who's listening to add it to their required reading, because it does really help us not only identify trends and do a deep dive, but it reminds us of the people behind all of this data. And I do want folks to consider that these are the people you're working with. These are your neighbors. These are your team members. These are, potentially even your leadership. We are working alongside of all of these victims every year, and it has a very deep impact on their lives. Next slide. I think David is going to break down some of the employee productivity impacts also from the aftermath study. David?
Right. Thank you, Eva. And yes, so this is more great data and insights from Eva and team at ITRC, and this really speaks to, so as Eva spoke about, behind these identity theft crimes are the people, are your employees, are people we know, and how this does impact them, and then tying that back to how does this impact their ability to be productive in the workplace. So some of this data, when people first look at it, seems quite shocking. Even the average number of working days it takes to resolve identity theft, 12.5 to 25 days. That number can seem quite surprising to people, and that duration can certainly be much longer depending on the extent of the incident that did occur. And then, of course, that comes into the fact that 22% of victims actually took time off work to deal with the situation. So again, these types of statistics and the fact that 8.6% of victims who felt supported by their employers throughout the process. There's really that kind of driver that we're talking about, that employees are really seeking help in this area, whether they're proactively asking for it or not. Those initial drivers and underlying factors that we spoke about on the front end is what's tying the fact that employers are starting to, in large part, provide identity theft protection, and then taking it that next step further and providing a full cyber wellness program as a benefit for employee total well-being. And on the flip side, on the positive side, Eva and team had great data as well around those that did have a program in place provided by their employer. The fact that 79% said that it reduced stress when they were dealing with an incident. 78% said it improved their quality of life. So as we always bring this back to the topic of today of employee total well-being and programs that are meaningful to employees and the employer, here we're talking on the employee side and productivity for the employer, but also this back to this concept that by protecting employees, you're protecting the business. So this idea that they become better frontline defenders, 76% agree that they became more invested in their organization's overall security. If I'm more aware in my personal life, I'm just going to be more aware when I am interacting in company security infrastructure. So this is meaningful information, again, indicators that cyber wellness deserves that recognition and extinction. So, or distinguish it, sorry. So when we look at, cyber wellness, we've been talking about this concept and what does it really mean to achieve cyber wellness? Well, that first step is the more traditional identity theft protection. It's very critical, it's important, it's meaningful. This is monitoring the dark web, monitoring credit, and this is all about alerting when something does occur and the ability to work with a team to resolve that. So this really is just that first step because achieving cyber wellness needs to focus on prevention. So as we move down the line here, protecting those personal devices and personal Wi-Fi networks. So this is not about interrupting or changing company cybersecurity. This is about personal devices and personal Wi-Fi networks. Having a personal VPN encrypt and protect all communications and data when we're hopping on the Wi-Fi at the airport. Having safe browsing tools and antivirus on our devices that is preemptively stopping an attempt from identity theft before it can occur. And when we think of broader cyber wellness, back to the point we're living our lives online, particularly through social media, which certainly can have very positive, but also can have negative impacts on us depending on that activity. So a program that helps curate and navigate a more positive overall interaction and reputation online and offline as well. Protecting these broader assets and as Eva spoke about, the aftermath, what people go through when they have a serious incident occur. Home title theft, for example, one of the number one growing white-collar crimes, is something that a lot of people don't even realize is an area they need to be aware of. And this is that type of event that is very overwhelming because it's so extreme in terms of what they're going to have to do to resolve this. So protecting those broader assets. And then finally, there's a massive industry out there of the collecting and selling of personal data. And a lot of this is through no fault of our own. Maybe we're giving our information online where we intend to, but then that data is sold and gets into the hands of somebody with nefarious intent. So through these data aggregators and data brokers, this is what can lead to identity theft. So a cyber wellness program should be finding personal data where it should not be and removing it on behalf of employees. And then for total cyber wellness, really needing to protect the entire family. So again, protecting children who are living more and more online against cyberbullying and making sure they're interacting with positive activity online. Again, the elderly population may be a little more susceptible, a lot to protect, so that full spectrum of protecting the family. And if an employee were going to take these steps to try and achieve cyber wellness on their own, what would they look like? Well, right now, generally speaking, the market is filled with fragmented solutions. So identity theft protection, again, most people are familiar with, which is a good thing. A lot of employers are providing good products through that. That can be $18 a month through the employer channel. If they're going to take those next steps and protect those personal devices with antivirus and have a personal VPN, dozens of products out there that another $12 a month, give or take. A lot of social reputation tools out there, social media tools. You kind of get the idea here that if an employee is going to cobble a solution together, first they're going to need to comb through dozens, maybe hundreds of vendors to find the right mix. And they'd be paying upwards of $80 a month and manage 6 products, 6 bills, 6 support lines. So just quick insight on Aura as a company and what we provide. That is our mission to provide and we are providing a cyber wellness platform that's all-encompassing for all of these areas of protection and looking at closer to $20 a month for a family plan in the voluntary space versus $80 a month. So I'll end here and go back to Eva, but Aura, we are proud to be providing the first and only unified cyber wellness platform, and certainly can provide more detail, but providing a platform that has a combination of technology that addresses these areas and removes the burden for employees to have to navigate these different areas that are often quite foreign to them. And Eva, back to you.
And just to touch on the ecosystem, the change in the ecosystem, we are not the only ones talking about how these things are starting to coalesce. Historically, we've had this very siloed policy and regulatory approach. For 35 years, we've treated privacy, cybersecurity, and identity management as these three distinct issues. They're governed by three different sets of laws and regulations. But in the past about 5 years or so, we've seen a steady rise in the number of cyber attacks, the amount of personal data collected and stored, the financial impact of data breaches, and those trends, along with the unprecedented growth of software and the software flaws. I mean, nothing is perfect, so we're going to have these inherent flaws that come along with software. That is what has driven us to the point where we are now finally starting to view privacy, security, and identity as a single issue. Yes, it has multiple facets, but it's a single issue that deserves a single set of laws and regulations. Next slide, please. So now we're starting to see this more holistic approach. It was the EU that started this trend in 2018. California and New York have now adopted comprehensive privacy and security laws. More states are considering them this year. And these laws are based on several key principles, and I'll just run through them really quickly. Don't collect more personal information than you need. Don't keep it longer than you need it. Audit your cybersecurity and privacy practices and fix them each year and fix them if they're weak. Give consumers access to the data you collect fast and for free. Correct it if they say it's wrong. Delete it if they ask. Yes, there are some limited exceptions. Ask them if they want to opt in or opt out of data collection, data sales, and data sharing. And don't penalize them if they do opt out, although you can offer incentives if they allow it. And then train your teams. Train your teams so they understand the obligations. And that's on the legislative front. But what are businesses currently doing? Well, we're seeing that leading companies are already making some or all of these principles part of their business. And this includes Microsoft, Apple, Google. We see them trying to get ahead of the deadlines for complying with some of these new government regulations, and in some cases they're going beyond what the new laws require. And honestly, consumers want greater control over how their information is used. It's our opinion that the world of commerce is not going to grind to a halt if we have a consumer consent focused business model. And I think some businesses will even use it as a key differentiator and a value proposition. If we look at what Apple is doing now, they give iPhone users the ability to opt into data sharing as a feature. There's no requirement for them to do this, but they're giving customers this tool to manage their own data. And what are governments currently doing more of? Well, I think more state governments will adopt these comprehensive data and privacy security laws. Virginia is likely to be next. In fact, last time I checked, it was on the governor's desk to sign. And this is kind of a California-style privacy law. And there are similar versions under consideration in Alabama, Oklahoma, Washington State, and very likely more on the way. There's even a chance that Congress could make progress on passing a national privacy and security law, or at least address some of the key issues in a series of individual laws. And, for those of you that think the landscape isn't right or ready yet, Congress did pass a new IoT, a new Internet of Things cybersecurity law late last year by unanimous vote. So it can be done. And with that, I will close it and open it up to questions.
Great.
And I think we're going through the Q&A, looking through here to see if there are any burning questions about all of this. Uh-oh, David, I think we made their heads explode with all of that data.
Yeah, I don't know if we got some coming through here. Oh, I don't know if the team out there can help ask some of these questions out loud.
I just saw one pop up that said, what is the business case we can use to convince a CEO that this is a place to put resources? And, very quickly, I can't list it all, but there are definitely the research and the costs. What we can do is look at the cost of the improper configuration, when we put the lack of infrastructure. A great case, if we look at government as an example, one of the key pieces of the puzzle with the unemployment identity theft issue was that we lacked the infrastructure at the state level. We had been starving the states of those resources in their cybersecurity infrastructure. When the pandemic started, we had 16 states that were running on Cobalt. And for those of you that don't know what it means, it's sort of like welcome to 1965. That's how old that system is. And instead of saying we will put the resources in here, it was just let's kind of patch things and try to build on this antiquated system. And now we're looking at upwards of $36 billion in losses. I guarantee you that the building of that cyber infrastructure would not cost nowhere near $36 billion. So I understand it's very hard to make the case, but when you look at the data of where it has gone wrong and how much it has cost, then you can start to make that argument.
Yeah, that's great. A couple other that have come through. So my organization currently offers an ID theft protection solution, but we don't have high take rates. What can my company do to educate employees on the importance of these solutions? And it's a great question, and it certainly depends on your strategy around benefits. And if this is a voluntary benefit, is it a part of core enrollment? Some employers take the approach of having, more on maybe a discount website or kind of an outsourced voluntary benefit platform where it just doesn't get quite the exposure. So it's a combination of educating employees as, rolling out this benefit and the importance of it and the value that, it will have for the employees on their lives and their families, but also making that part of core enrollment so that it is kind of prioritized with other benefits that, individuals expect that they're going to make decisions on. So as, again, more and more these types of benefits programs are on the forefront, the more you can get it in front of employees and explain the value, certainly the better. Okay. We had some comments as well of how heavily affected their company was with unemployment fraud, and we were one of the first to catch this. And let's see, how can we learn more on this? So we certainly can provide more detail on this. And for that person out there, good for you for leading the charge for identifying this and helping bring that to light, because it's certainly, almost every employer we talk to nowadays, when we ask the question, have your employees asked about or have you come across unemployment fraud within your company, the answer is typically yes. It's no is far and few between nowadays. So it's one of those examples that, as Eva was talking through it affects the employee, of course, but it affects the employer also. So from an education standpoint, having a program in place that can assist employees and mitigate when these incidents do occur. Question around how can we learn more about solutions out there that you provide and compare to best of breed solutions. We can certainly follow up directly Eva and I, with giving more detail around that. But the question is important because it is, the market out there has so many point solutions that all in their own right, some of them are valuable and do a very good job. That said, as Eva has echoed as well, this approach to a more comprehensive view of cyber wellness is the direction we need to be going in as individuals and as companies as well. So, the time of these point solutions, we will start to evolve. And we'll start to have these more unified platforms because it's necessary. You can't protect everything if they're in these disparate solutions. And just some more comments out there. Thank you for sharing. My employer is constantly having required trainings on cybersecurity topics, and as Eva went through, this is so critical in terms of for the company's protection, but also ensuring that employees are those most effective frontline defenders that they can be.
Yay, your employer gets a gold star.
That's great.
Oh, and I'm seeing I've started to encounter bots on LinkedIn. Is there a safeguard that's recommended for social media usage for employees? We should take that one offline because that's a very, very long answer. But I would say yes, there are certain policies and things that you can do to educate them on social media usage, how to use it safely, how to ensure their privacy settings are set to the most private setting and not the default setting, and also how to recognize where you have a role, where the platform can't necessarily protect you from all of these encounters, but that you can start to modify your behavior so that you're protected.
Absolutely. Well, very good. Well, we still have some coming in. I think, Eva, we can also follow up directly a number of questions that came through. So I don't know, Eva, do we have anything else we wanted to cover before we close?
I think just that, folks, if you do have further questions or want to engage with the ITRC, our contact information is on the screen here, and we will respond to all of these questions after the webinar closes. So you will hear back from us if you did put a question in there that we didn't get to.
And likewise on the Aura side, so you can see our contact information here, so we'll certainly follow up directly and happy to have any further discussions on this very important topic. So I want to thank everybody for your time today. Eva, thank you as well, and thanks to HR Executive. I've really enjoyed the session, and we'll follow up with everyone directly. And with that, we'll give you 5 minutes back in your day and hope everybody has a good day. Thank you, Eva.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, David.